All right, here we go.
How many intros do we have now?
Let's do another 5. Okay, here. You know what? We forgot to do the Team SFT Justice League style intro. So, you know what? We'll spare the audience. We've already got 20 people in the chat. So, that being said, good to see everybody in the chat. Great chat already. Super stickers flying in. Doki Doki, the super sticker master. I appreciate it, brother. I appreciate the support. So, kind of a spur of the moment stream. So, we apologize for kind of making you guys wait. We discussed when should we go live. We thought 12:30, but as you know, Matt and I really like to make sure that we got a lot of visuals. We've got a lot of clips we're going to show you. So, it's going to be very, very interactive. One Punch Man says, "Go Creation Corpse." I appreciate it. One Punch Man is the man because he is the king of comment sections. You should see when Dr. Dodgeball, Dan Stern, Cardinal pops up. You've got One Punch Man there just giving him the jabs in terms of arguments. So keep it up, One Punch Man. We've got Doki Doki SFT Fan Club, Super Creation Bros. So you know what? That might be the next intro or meme we get. Isn't that right, Matt? Matt, I got to say, brother, I'm all out of coconut water, so I'm kind of...
oh, no.
Yeah, I'm kind of upset. So, but the things we're going to be discussing in this stream, I think, is going to be worth it and kind of make up for it. Oh, there's CJ. Yeah, depending on what time you're going to stay up till, brother, there's an argument that I find you're really, really good at debunking. And I think once Matt and I get through the arguments we're going to be dealing with, I wouldn't mind you popping in if you're still up to kind of edify the audience with your response to an argument that's kind of popped up. And so for the audience sake, what we're going to be dealing with tonight, hopefully, we're going to be dealing with this argument about how vegetarian animals could adapt quickly to a meat-eating diet. We're going to deal with that. We're going to deal with a hilarious argument. You can still see that I'm laughing. I'll screen share it. It's an argument that has to do with speciation rates. So we're going to deal with that as well. We're going to deal with a couple arguments pertaining to the decaying magnetic field, as well as the sun losing mass. So some of these lines of evidence that limit the age of the Earth. That being said, last week, guys, was busy. It was awesome. An epic week. We kicked off the week with Dr. Charles Jackson, and we went over carbon-14, C14 found in samples that are apparently millions to billions of years old, and yet there's detectable levels of C14. We left no stone unturned. Check that out, guys. We gathered the best, or I should say the most favorite rebuttals. I don't want to say best because there's really no good arguments, just rescue devices, and we dealt with that. So definitely irrefutable. That video's gone untouched so far. Next day, we had Sal Jardina here for an epic presentation on God's creation revelation, where we debunked a lot of the biblical compromising positions. And then the very next day, we had the big debate between Ken Hovind and Mark Reed, the debate that everyone's been waiting for. We almost beat our record. We got about 310 live. The record is still Stacy Turbeville versus Ken Hovind, End Times Theology. That one hit roughly 370 people. So that being said, we should probably do more End Times Theology debates. That seems to be what people want. And then the next day, we had another big main event, Matt Powell versus Dr. Kenny Rhodes, which was a blast. So that being said, before we get into the actual arguments, let me share screen real quick, give you guys an update on our website that we're extremely pumped for everybody to see. Okay, so great news. The web designer, I hired a very talented web designer who assures me it's going to be done in 7 days. That was yesterday, so we got about 6 days. Guys, this is going to have all our content in one place. This is just an example of it, just a sample of it. It's currently getting ready right now. We're going to have the video section is going to be highly comprehensive. We're going to have all the different categories with tons and tons of videos there, articles as well. Right on the front page, We're going to have answering common questions, refuting arguments. We're going to have a meet the team section as well. And it's going to be a ton of fun, guys. This is going to be comprehensive. We're going to make sure that this website has all the answers to all your questions, all the refutations to all the common arguments put forth by the critics. So that being said, should be ready in about 7 days. Yeah, 6 or 7 days. So I'm really, really excited for you guys to see that. Also, Matt, if you wanted to maybe touch on right before we get to the arguments that we're going to deal with, did you want to give a reminder over the 2 books that we have coming out, hopefully in the next month or 2?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We have actually 2 really large books coming out. He's been focusing on one and I've been focusing on another. Usually we kind of team up and we kind of plow through a book, but this time, just because of the sheer amount of necessity required and they're different subjects, it's really hard to focus on one and kind of jump back to another one. So we've separated out. He's focusing on trying to find the most up-to-date arguments used by evolutionists when it comes to trying to prove evolution. What are their retrodictions? What have they predicted? What have they failed on? And why? What have they revised? How have they changed their arguments? And by doing so, he has compiled the best evidence for evolution and then refuted it in his book. I have taken another deviation. I went for a local versus global flood. We're always debating against evolution, but local versus global flood would be a really good one because there's a lot of contention within the Christian community based on, was this event an actual local scenario or was this a global event? And because there's so much dissension between believers within the same thing, I figured, why not just clear it up? Let's go for let's look at both sides completely and lay out every argument, and then I take the side of global. So I give my evidence for why I believe it is. And I don't go my normal route. We usually talk about, let's look at the geology. Let's try to show that there's proof of a global flood in a geologic column. Well, why do that? Let's talk to the Christian about what the Bible actually says, and let's go for the scriptural evidence, and then let's look at it from a historical evidence, and then a genealogical evidence, and then linguistic evidence, and then we go over the math and everything. I deviate more than just science. So I think it'll be a fun book. Both of them are going to be very different from our usual books that we release. So
big time. So it's going to be a couple more books to add to the collection. I've got most of our books behind me. Independent Origins Handbook, of course, Universal or Separate Ancestry, Debunking Human Evolution, Special Creation, Refuting the Critics. I've got the Young Earth Creation Model. We've got the Mutation Rate book as well. And of course, Debunking Aaron Ra's Flood series, which was made into a video. So a couple more books to add to the repertoire of sources that demolish the critics and really show just how powerful the evidence is for young earth creation. Isn't that right, Matt?
Yeah, you got
okay.
to.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, just the critics' arguments against young earth creation shows you that when they tell you they've been young earth creationists, they either were so long ago that they don't realize that the arguments and science that we have now is completely different, or they just really weren't much educated on it. You can tell they didn't really study it in depth, because when you press them on it, they really don't know. So, I mean, now they have a place to come. We have the resources for pretty much everything now. I mean, how many videos do we have? 2,000?
Yeah. and that's the thing. So we've got so many videos out there on the channel. I think we've got over 12 or 1,300. And I'm just looking for a thumbnail here too. Okay. So we've got so many videos that even on the website, when it first goes public, we're going to have probably about 100 of our videos up there. I made sure that it's 100 videos addressing all the common arguments. But as time goes on, we're slowly going to upload all the videos. But we've got brother CJ Cox in the live chat. And I was looking for the thumbnail that we have for his epic debate. I don't have it uploaded yet. I'm going to set that event probably tonight, because we've got a lot of epic debates, science-based debates, theology-based debates for you guys over the next couple months. Ton of great interviews as well. I'm already starting to book interviews for November, December, January. So tons of fun, some big names as well. So this is going to be awesome. Brother CJ Cox is going to be debating Randall Rouser on, correct me if I'm wrong, CJ, in the chat, was the conquest of Canaan hyperbolized. So that's going to be a ton of, that's going to be a big debate. That's going to be at the end of September. So that being said, lots to look forward to. As always, make sure you're checking the upcoming live stream section. That's where you're going to find all the events that I've at least kind of secured all the details and therefore have set for people to see. Anyways, we've gone 14 minutes. So reminders, introductions, updates out of the way, guys. Great chat so far. We appreciate the super stickers and the super chats. And as I say that, another one comes in. Cheryl, sister, I appreciate that. You guys are the life and blood of this channel. You guys are the reason why Matt and I can do this full time. You guys are the reason why we can now put out a professional website for everybody. You guys are going to love it. We're going to share it around, get this information out to everybody. So CJ says, I think Randall wanted to change it to, did God command the slaughter of the Canaanites to better reflect his position? Okay, perfect. Yeah, lots of fun, lots of theology related debates coming up too. So that's going to be great. I appreciate it. CJ, I appreciate it. Bond as well. So that being said, let's get right into the first workout. Cheryl says coffee. I wish I could have a coffee at this time, but even for me, it's too late, but I am craving one. But I've got lemonade, so hopefully the lemonade will keep me going. So here we go, guys. A lot of arguments that kind of came to mind that we've been hearing over the last few days. So we will be winging a lot of it, but these are just typical sad arguments that we've dealt with so many times before that it's, as usual, kind of, we're hearing the same arguments over and over again, right, Matt? But this one definitely takes the cake. So I'm going to screen share. Okay. And tell me if you can see this one. So I joined an after show the other day, Matt, and the theistic evolutionists were up to their usual shenanigans with their arguments about ERVs and speciation and chromosome 2 fusion. So these arguments are just so easy to debunk. You know, their so-called best arguments have actually become, Matt and myself, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, they've become our favorite arguments to debunk because their best arguments have actually become arguments for our side. Have you noticed that, brother?
Well, yeah, because we dig deep and we go, wow, this was really good. I love this. So, right. I mean, once you dive into it, the numbers always work out in our favor. So sometimes digging deep is really good.
Well, and here's the thing. When it comes to the speciation argument, right? What they'll say in a nutshell is there's far too many species today on the planet. And we did like a 3-hour debunking of Joel Duff on this with no response. Goes untouched. And it's hilarious because Joel Duff responded in blog form, and I think Sentinel Apologetics also had him on, and I kind of skimmed through it. No rebuttal, no testable predictions, and no answers to the challenges that we presented as always. So it's really telling, right? They're kind of cornered, and they know they really don't have a response. So it's a lot of posturing is what we're getting. While we stick to the data, the evidence, okay? So that being said, the argument is there's too many species to have arisen in just 4,500 years, okay? And then we point out a number of reasons, including technical papers, right? I'm just going to do this in a nutshell. We're going to go into more detail, that what we're seeing today is actually rapid adaptive episodes, okay? And oftentimes this is done through reduction in allelic variability, reduction in heterozygosity. A lot of times there's epigenetics at work, okay? Because all it takes oftentimes is a new environment, an organism to enter a new environment, and due to that environmental cue or stimuli, what happens in the epigenome is a gene or genes are turned on, which can lead to rapid adaptation. So the point is change and speciation is actually occurring a lot faster than evolution has ever predicted, okay? Then what we do is we actually go into the numbers, and we've pointed out that we've seen new bird species originate in real time on islands that we are actually studying, for example, on the Galapagos Islands. So that being said, an argument was put forth here by the Smokey Saint comedy show, okay? And he says, and give me your thoughts on this, Matt, because this is a prime example as to why somebody like Smokey Saint is what we call low-hanging fruit, because they don't bring anything new to the table. They clearly have not read the technical literature coming out from young earth creation scientists on certain arguments such as speciation. We've got a very detailed model, a very technical model with testable predictions laid out that clearly these types of critics aren't looking into based on their responses. So Matt, tell me what your thoughts on this are. Is the screen shared, brother? You can see?
Yes.
Okay, so he says, if SFT's formula is right, why aren't there at least thousands, Matt, of species on the Galapagos, right? Because we saw new finch species form on the Galapagos Island. I've got a couple papers that demonstrate that, I believe, from 2017. And when we look to the genotype, we always recommend look to the genotype, okay? When you look to the phenotype, you don't necessarily know what's actually going on in terms of genetics. And what we'll see is what's going on in terms of genetics is no help to large-scale evolution, fish-to-fisherman evolution, because we're seeing reduction, right? What we've seen in these Darwin species is what's called a shift in heterozygosity. Heterozygosity is just a fancy word that means a state of DNA diversity towards homozygosity, okay? All you need when it comes to rapid speciation is what? Especially with our model, if the DNA differences are front-loaded and they're there at the beginning, then simply through recombination, gene conversion, migration, isolation, inbreeding, shifts from heterozygosity to homozygosity, boom. As long as there's enough distinctiveness, we've got a new species. But remember, it's through shifts in more allelic potential or allelic variability to less, okay? You're not going to take a fish to fisherman by losing money. And only losing money, okay? So that being said, so he says, if SFT's formula is right, why aren't there at least thousands of species on the Galapagos? Matt, go ahead. How would you, what are your thoughts initially on that argument? Go ahead, brother.
I would say, for one, have you ever actually seen the Galapagos Islands? Look at me right now. Ready? That, right there. These are the Galapagos Islands. They're not very big. Why in the world would anybody think that you would get hundreds of thousands or millions of bird species on such a small group of islands to begin with? So, of course, they would be...
Matt.
Yes.
Let me be devil's advocate. I'm going to be the Smokey Saint comedy show here. Well, because, Matt, you guys said that you predict roughly 2 to 3 new bird species per year. So if you got 2 to 3 new bird species forming on the Galapagos Island, then I mean, before you know it, you got thousands of species. So what's the deal, bro?
We're not talking about a single group of islands. We're talking about worldwide. Worldwide.
No. Galapagos Island, 2 to 3 new bird species per year. My name's Smokey Saint, and I know more than you.
What? The islands are small. You can't just have this.
Wait a minute. You meant 2 to 3.
Not the islands.
What? Wait a minute. You meant 2 to 3 new bird species per year worldwide?
Yeah. Of course. Oh. Of course. How in the world would we predict an island bird species? That doesn't even make sense.
So what you're saying is we got another critic with egg on his face.
If that's what he said, he put his foot in his mouth. That's crazy.
His arguments are almost as good. His arguments are almost as good as his arguments for soteriology, which are really bad. Before I know I'm interrupting you, Matt, but it's just too good to be true, right?
Okay.
And this is what he'd say if he was in here debating, so might as well debunk it, right? Praise I am's in the chat, so we might need a thumbnail with the Smokey Saint comedy show egg, and we're talking about a Tyrannosaurus Rex egg. Like, we're talking about a big egg here, because this is a lot of egg on his face. Okay, anyways, as we can see, this is a bad argument to begin with, right? So, yeah, keep going, brother. What are your... Let's deal with the argument. Let's deal with the evidence and the data as we always do. Go ahead.
Okay, well, first of all, me and you weren't the ones to predict this. This was actually predicted in 2017 by Dr. Jeanson, and the next year it was actually proven. And I cut out a video clip for everybody to prove this. Check this out.
Not only does creation explain the obvious evidences, the popular evidences, equally well as evolution. It explains the most fundamental fact of biology much better than evolution does. And when we drill down into the genetics, this is the last point I'd make, I guess, on the elevator, is when you look at the most important lines of evidence for evolution, the most important field of science when it comes to the origins question, that's the field of genetics. Creation actually explains it better. You get down to the technical evidences, creation explains the technical evidences for evolution far better than evolution itself does. And there's great irony here. One of the subfields of genetics in which creationists are actively succeeding and surpassing evolution is the rate at which genetic mistakes or mutations occur. Mm-hmm. Here we have the engine of evolution. And irony of ironies, it's the creationists who are doing a better job making predictions about the rates at which this should occur. And that's the essence of the creation evolution debate. Evolutionists say we don't do this, so now you can explain it to your kids. Here's what they say we can't do, and the reality is that's factually incorrect. So I've put the date of this scientific article here down here in the lower part of the screen, January 2018. That's significant because this finding, this announcement, was published several months after I published my book in fall of 2017. And one of the predictions I made, so we put the book in print and there were many sleeps that followed before this paper came out, was that there would be a certain rate at which species form. And so this comes from the concept of Noah taking kinds on board the ark, which is about the level of family, those kinds coming off the ark and then forming new species. And given just 4,500 years of history instead of millions of years of history for animals, there's very different predictions that evolution makes versus what creationists makes on the rate at which species form. Well, exhibit A for evolutionary biology has been these Darwin's finches. There's a group of finches, a few of them shown here, in the Galapagos Islands, and only in the Galapagos Islands, that have been studied for several decades. Well, this brand new finding that was announced in January 2018 was in this particular this species of finch. They said a new one formed. And I found out about this actually in February, Darwin's birthday, a favorite day for evolutionists to try to put a stick in the eye of creationists saying, na, 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 see what you don't know or can't do. And so they were announcing, here, here's a good thing to shove in the face of a creationist. Well, if you run the math about the rate at which these species have formed, and this is the only known example that I know of, that is a real-time measurement of a new species forming. So here's our first example of it, formation of a new species documented in real time. And what is the rate? It matches exactly what the Bible predicts. It's remarkable. And again, it's highly ironic. Just as creationists are predicting the speed with which copying mistakes occur at the genetic level, the engine of evolution, we are also predicting the rate at which species form in their favorite example of evolution. Darwin's finches are what shows up time and time again in the evolutionary textbooks as to, here's evolution in action.
So as you guys can see, it's pretty clear. The prediction was made, and then that's exactly what we saw, and it lined up with what Scripture is saying. Based on if there was a flood, how many bird species would we predict to see based on that criteria? So if I'm going to screen share because I tried to upload some images, and you have like 100 already uploaded, so I couldn't even upload one image. So I'm just going to screen share for this because it's
sure, no problem.
All right. So I'm going to open this one right here, and we see that Darwin went the very first time in 1835 when he went to the Galapagos Islands. Now, he was quite young at this time and hadn't documented anything yet. But as time went on, we actually found that he documented about 13 species of finch. Well, today we can look and we can build this chart and see that there are many more. Actually, sorry about that. There are 18 today on that island, but when Darwin did it, there was 13. So we see a increase in the species of just these finches, and it's accounting for a small island. So if we're accounting for a small island where speciation would be less, would not really be going on. Remember, Darwin predicted, based on evolution, based on the size of the island, that the finches would speciate once every 3,000 years. We're finding the exact opposite is true. So when we look over here, we find that the new study shows that a new species develops in about 2 generations. That's 3.4 years Think about that. 3.4 years, that's nothing. We look at the number of finches that are in the family, and we see there's 233 species in that family alive today. So, I mean, we're talking a low number, what would be required um, for evolution to be true. So what happens is we can run the number. I want you guys to Google this yourself sometime and just go over and type in how many bird species are there. It says sometimes they say around 10,000, but to help evolution, I found the highest number I could. And that number is 18,000 different bird species. So if you actually do the math and you run it, what's 3.4 forming, dating back to when I believe the flood was, 5,318 years ago, using the Greek Septuagint instead of Masoretic text, you get 18,081 bird species. Well, it's exactly what we see. I mean, the evolutionist goes, well, you know, you're not accounting.
Well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Are you saying that we're seeing a new bird species every 3 to 4 years forming on the Galapagos Island? How come there's not thousands of birds on the bird species on the Galapagos Island?
Oh, not again.
Remember, when we demolish a talking point, what happens? Do they tap out and admit they were wrong?
Never.
No, they keep repeating, right?
They'll just take it to another creationist that doesn't know it and use it on
right.
Them. Right.
Or go back to the drawing board and try and come up with a new argument or new trick. Anyways, I just had to throw that in there just to really show everybody how ridiculous these arguments are that we're getting now. If you want, you can share screen again and keep going through that, brother. I just wanted to throw that in there. Go ahead.
You can see what the secular people are saying about this. The researchers who once assumed that evolution required millennia are documenting species adapting in mere decades or even shorter time frames. Adaptation is happening right under our noses in our lifetimes. Species are evolving at speeds that Darwin could have never imagined. Why? Because evolution is not true. It's really just that simple. We look at plants. Do we think it's just animals? No. Look at this. We started investigating plants and watching and seeing how fast the daisies go through speciation. Look at that. Fast, rapid amount of time. And we can do the same thing. We look at animals. Standing for Truth does this all the time. He goes, well, what about cats? Look at how fast we got them, all the different cats. Look at that. In this show, in 1871, there were 170 cats that were exhibited. Now, in just 50 years, more than half of the breeds recognized came and originated from just 50 years. All of the cats that we have today. So if that can happen with selective breeding, imagine after a global flood with punctuated equilibrium occurring in species migrating around the world. For those not familiar with what punctuated equilibrium is, I would just I save this for everybody so we can go over it really, really quickly. It's basically a theory that's describing an evolutionary change that occurs rapidly in a brief geological time, really, really quickly. And not slowly or gradual evolution over time. So when we look, this is what gradualism teaches. You know, you get a butterfly on the left and slowly it changes and beneficial mutations come along and it allows for gradual change into different varieties and kinds. But what punctuated equilibrium is and what we see is that the change is diverse. One generation can have offspring of 3 different varieties instantly. A cheetah can have a cub that can be spotless or with spots, and they can be totally different. And that's what we're seeing. And so therefore, which one's going to do better? Well, if the cheetah goes into the snow, well, the one without spots is going to do better. So that becomes its own species. And it did that from a parent ancestor. And this happens really, really quickly. So that's what punctuated equilibrium is. Here's another example. Can punctuated equilibrium happen fast? Exactly. The punctuated equilibrium comes in spurts. However, punctuated equilibrium is any sudden or rapid change in a species. Basically, that's the easiest and best way to explain it to somebody. It went against Darwinian evolution because Darwin, remember, he promoted gradualism, something slow that changes over time. It's very, very gradual. There is no rapid change that occurs because that wouldn't be evolution. That wouldn't be change. Then we look and we see this rapid change occurring in our lifetime. That was why everyone is saying now that this is completely contrary to Darwin's projections and what we would expect to see if evolution is true. This article came out and it shows that animals are evolving faster than you think. And here's living proof. and they go down and they show what happens in almost every different thing you can see, from aquatic life to turtles to plants and to animals. So if we have an example of speciation happening rapidly in all these different forms that we're finally observing and keeping an eye on, then what makes people think that our model isn't true when we're making the prediction that that's exactly what we're going to find? You see, what makes the finches a really good example for us is because of the fact that speciation shouldn't really be occurring too quickly on that island. It's already populated. So something that would get onto the island would actually speciate much faster. But since it's already been that way, speciation should be much slower. And we're still seeing it occur rapidly. So another thing comes down to that is, when something's isolated on an island, you pretty much have an animal or an organism that you can test that can't run away. Meaning you have a great test subject. It's not going to leave the island very easily. I mean, even though it's a bird, it's still got to fly over the ocean to get to the mainland. It's not. So you have a really good criteria of, like, I can study these finches. That's why Darwin probably liked them too, because I can study these and get a really good criteria of what's going to happen. And that's exactly what we see. So when we went back and they were using the finches as a great example, they said, oh, these will be perfect for Darwin's birthday. We can study the finches, and they'll help prove more evolution. And you release a dog into a wild or a deer, it's just going to run around, and they're breed really quickly. It's hard to keep track of them because they'll just run around. You can lose track of them. But on an island, they're really stuck.
And what happened on an island when 2 deer were released? Just 2 deer alone. What happened after a few generations?
Yeah, that was another great example of what we would expect if creation were true. Because when an animal were to get off the ark, what we would expect to see is that the animal would diversify and it would move out and migrate, and reproduction wouldn't be hindered from inbreeding. And that's exactly what we found. We found 2 deer were released in New Zealand. And actually, it was 1 male and 3 female. And they were released in New Zealand and let go. And exactly what we would predict happened is they populated the island by so much that within 100 years, there's over 100,000 of them. And you can basically go to New Zealand and kill these deer, as many as you want. You can go hunting and just slaughter them, mass slaughter, because they can't get rid of them fast enough. That's how much they've taken over just New Zealand. We have examples of goats and all kinds.
Right. Exactly. Rapid speciation, rapid breeding, rapid and exponential population growth. And what I find funny, Matt, there's a couple things that come to mind based on what you're saying. Okay. So one thing, we're actually studying Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Island, correct?
Yeah.
We've got people there, we're studying, and we're observing in real time speciation events. The world's a big place. Are we observing? Do we have people and researchers in all parts of the globe studying every last population of bird to see these speciation events?
Well, no, because 1, they believed it was slow to begin with. So why are they looking for something they're not expecting to see, for 1? 2, they're not even near a super hot region of the world on the equator where speciation would be happening even more rapidly, because the closer you get to the equator, the faster mutations occur, the more rapid speciation you would probably get to begin with. And we're talking about a world that's already saturated in animals, and we're already seeing those shifts into heterozygosity. So the speciation events are going to be more rare now than they were in the past, and we're still seeing them quick.
Exactly. Great point. So no, we're not studying every inch of the globe. Okay. And yet what we are studying, we've got this new data that suggests, wow, a new bird species forming exactly how Dr. Nathaniel Jensen predicted they would based on the created heterozygosity model. Okay. Shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity. As years go on and you get more shifts, as you were pointing out, from heterozygosity to homozygosity, you get a lesser potential for genetic change, right? Creationists, we look back to the creation event. We look back in time to the expansion of genetic information, the expansion of allelic variability, okay? And as time goes on, we get a reduction in allelic variability. So at first, you have more rapid speciation events. And today, thousands of years later, speciation events should be a little more rare. And yet we still see it. And yet we still see very few numbers of species overall. And something you said, Matt, which was a great point, is we like to look to birds and almost give the evolutionists the benefit of the doubt, because we're looking at roughly between 12 and 18,000, which is one of the greater number of species that we have on the planet, right? When we look to lizards and we look to snakes and we look to rabbits and we look to whatever, I mean, we got numbers on everything, felids, canids. There's not that many, easily explainable. Right. So we go with birds, which we find more species for, and yet what do we find? The data is matched perfectly to the young Earth creation model going back 4,500 years. So what I find funny, Matt, is you'll get these theistic evolutionists or these old Earth creationists, okay? And they'll put forth this talking point. Oh, there's just too many species. How do you explain why there's so many species? So then what we do, Matt, what are your thoughts on this, brother? And then we'll spend a few minutes showing, no, there's actually too few species. What we see is perfectly in line with the biblical creation model. And the data has resulted in successful testable predictions. And then we ask them, why are there so few species? And what do they say? They start fumbling all over themselves. Well, I mean, like, you got to think about extinction events, and what about stasis, and what about this, and what about that? And it's like suddenly they're on the defense. Do you notice that? They wanted to put us on the defense, and within a few minutes, you have them on the defense. Well, I mean, the young Earth creationists are not considering X, Y, and Z. And what did we ask Adam Heap, zoologist and herpetologist, when we debated him on Modern Day Debate? We asked him, what testable predictions can you make? Right? And he said he can't make any. Right. Because there's too many factors at play to make any. Oh, really? Well, the gold standard of science is to make testable predictions. We've actually heard an argument in the past recently where somebody said, you know, a really bad young Earth creationist argument is to say that young Earth creation is the gold standard of science. No young Earth creationist has ever said that, okay? This was just completely wrong. No truth to it. What we do say is the gold standard of science is to make testable and falsifiable predictions. If you have a model, then that model should make, if accurate, testable and falsifiable predictions. And testable and falsifiable predictions are the gold standard of science, which means the evolutionists can meet that standard and the creationists can meet that standard. Nobody ever said that young Earth creation is the gold standard of science. What we said is making testable predictions that are falsifiable is the gold standard of science. And that's what creationists are doing. So there's another ridiculous argument that just came to mind right now, here and now. So yeah, they're on the defense, Matt.
I like
and yeah, go ahead, brother. What are your thoughts on all that?
I find it funny too, because if they were to ask you, say like, well, there's too few species, you just ask them, well, how many should there be? Their response is hilarious. Well, how many there are? What?
Yeah,
that's your argument. This is no prediction. They don't even have a model. So how can they make predictions? If you don't have a model, you can't even make a prediction, because it goes with whatever they think. You know, it's like, well, what do the evolutionists say? It's like, who cares what you say? Aren't you an old Earth creationist? You don't have your own thoughts. You're just going to go with whatever the consensus says. That changes every decade. So what do you believe? This year's science book or next year's of the futures? That's why they can't make any testable predictions, because it changes all the time.
That's why every single one of their rescue devices, even the rescue devices from Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, never actually result in their own testable predictions. Yes, they have faked a testable prediction, right? When it actually turned out to be a retrodiction. Yeah. Let me share screen here real quick. Okay. Another thing too with these critics is you'll often ask that, you'll back them up into a corner, right, Matt? And you'll say, can you name one or two testable predictions coming out of the young Earth creationist side? And they won't be able to name any. But yet these are the same critics that are bringing up ERVs, speciation, chromosome 2 fusion, the fossil record over and over again. Because what it is it's talking points. They've heard it said by somebody else. They've read it on a website, maybe by a logos, and now they're repeating it, okay? So I like here how Dr. Nathaniel Jensen puts it. In short, the population genetic processes of inbreeding, small population sizes, and migration/geographic isolation, in technical terms, as we've been saying, shifts from Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium could produce enormous species diversity in 4,500 years or less. In fact, the abilities of these processes are so strong that the plausibility of post-flood speciation isn't even a valid question anymore. Instead of trying to ask if any species could have risen in a few thousand years, listen closely, guys, we may as well ask why more species haven't done so. Why aren't there more species? And here, okay, is where the evolutionists or the theistic evolutionists and the old earth creationists go wrong. Is oftentimes you'll have old earth creationists say, well, you know, we could just concede a lot of these genetic related arguments, right? But we still have the deep time. No, they don't get it, okay? Because the evolutionary model, Matt, right? They say the origin of all genetic diversity for the most part is due to mutations. Mutation provides the necessary variation for natural selection to act upon and utilize, right? Then you also have these DNA variants, which are due to mutations, okay, that can shuffle every generation through recombination gene conversion. These DNA variants and this genetic variation has to be built up over time. That's why evolutionists need millions of years to build up the genetic variation necessary for change and adaptive episodes and speciation to even be possible. But Matt, the model we're putting forth as young earth creationists is what? Design diversity, okay? The original organisms, the original kinds were front-loaded with internal diversity that could then be utilized by natural selection. The pre-existing DNA variants and differences can go through recombination, gene conversion. We can get new varieties quickly. The DNA differences are already built in. Then you get a lot of old earth creationists that say, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. We're not going to argue about that. Now they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because they are now, and I don't think they understand the implications of it, they are now holding to this position that naturally results in rapid adaptive episodes. So now the old earth creationists, their main struggle is, oh no, why aren't there more species? And them also conceding, Matt, that, okay, yeah, genetic entropy puts shelf lives on genomes, and the low variation in Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA means that humanity is young. That doesn't work either, because the implications of that is what? Well, they're going to have to reject the geological column, which they don't want to do, because then you have people like William Lane Craig who recognize that you got these fossil groups like Neanderthalensis, Heidelbergensis, Naledi, Floresiensis, Erectus. You've got them in layers where that just wouldn't work out if man is young, unless you want to say Neanderthals and Erectus and Heidelbergensis are not humans. You've got William Lane Craig with a new book where he suggests, based on the fossil record, that what? The origin of humans go back about 700,000 years to Heidelbergensis. Heidelbergensis is the last common ancestor of Neanderthals and humans. So point is, it becomes very contradictory, inconsistent. It's only the young earth creation model, Matt, that is consistent. And because it is consistent, it can result in successful testable predictions. Go ahead, brother.
No, I'm shocked that he even wrote a book. I mean, he has no idea what he's talking about on the subject. Amazing, he has a book on it. So what a ridiculous thing that would be, huh? And by the way, you were right. Matter of fact, if you actually go over to that study of the Darwin finches, check this out. You can see right here, it's an increase in homozygosity on the Darwin finches. That new species that arose, it's higher in homozygosity.
Yeah,
exactly what you said. Exactly what was predicted.
Isn't that funny? Young Earth creationists making successful testable predictions based on speciation rates, which the critics still want to put forth this argument that says, well, why is there so many species? Or better yet, why aren't there thousands of species on the Galapagos Islands? So, you know, it's just getting bad. And you know what? Here's another argument. And I've used this in debates. And here's why we say that some of these critics are low-hanging fruit. Okay, we've got a lot of projects. We've also had tons of debates. Matt, you've had a ton of debates. You and I have debated Adam Heap, who's a professional, at least in terms of zoology and herpetology, and he'd understand this probably better than a lot of people. I've had 2 debates with conspiracy cats. The second debate, we focused a lot on speciation. You know, we've debated some pretty serious students and also very knowledgeable PhD scientists in evolution on this topic. So then when you get other critics that are just coming in and they're thinking that they're going to be able to put forth some arguments that we haven't dealt with, it's just funny. It's like we've dealt with this for years now. We've even had extensive debates on this. So here's another argument. Okay. Another argument is you can just look to breeds. Okay. And we like to look to, right, Matt? We like to look to the horse, donkey, and zebra family, because we know that when it comes to wild species, there's what? 3 species of zebra today, 1 wild horse, and 3 asses, wild asses. There's about 7 species in total. How many breeds of horses and donkeys in the world are there, Matt, roughly?
Oh, a lot. Well over 50 horses, because there's a lot of money to be made in horse racing. So
Yeah.
Lots.
Yeah. When it comes to, if you want to consider horses and donkeys, you're looking at like 800.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
So ask yourself this. Where did all the breeds come from today? Anybody in the audience? Where did the breeds come from? Well, obviously we know that since humans, right, artificially selected for certain traits in the genome for breeds, then we know humans are the ones that are responsible for producing all of these breeds. Okay. So even the evolutionists would have to admit that all the roughly 800 breeds of horses and donkeys came from a common ancestor within human history, if humans are the ones selecting and producing them, right? It's pretty basic. But they want to now say that it is impossible to get 7 species of equids from a pair of, say, equid archetypes on board the ark thousands of years ago. But yet, even by their own standards, humans can produce roughly 700 to 800 breeds just based on pre-existing DNA variety, right? That's what the created heterozygosity model says, is that the original created kinds, the original archetypes of all the species today had the genetic capacity for this type of change. And that's exactly why we see rapid adaptive episodes in paper after paper. Okay. And this is just one simple example as to how easy it really is to get all of these species in just a few thousand years. We can just look at what has been done on the farm and we can see this. And here's one last thing I'll say is the 7 wild species of equid, according to the evolutionists, took roughly 4 million years to come about. But then they'll agree it only took thousands of years for the 700 plus breeds. But remember, the evolutionists assume that all genetic variation, for the most part, is the result of mutations. That's not what we say, and that's not what the data suggests. The data suggests that the vast majority of genetic variation came from pre-existing means. Okay, they were pre-existing, which means species can come about just as quickly as breeds. Go ahead, brother.
I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, I don't understand why they're convoluting it and trying to make it as though it's still an argument. You can literally create a dog breed yourself as long as you don't have something at the bottom of the barrel like a Chihuahua. If you have a wolf, you can make other dog breeds from it, which is essentially a speciation, but it's not taking place in the wild, so it's not a speciation event because obviously nature didn't select those traits. You did. You forced it. You're like, I want a wolf to be hairless. Okay, go ahead. It's not going to be a new species, but it'll be a hairless wolf. So you can essentially make animals yourself based on what was there. So what animal was on the ark Well, essentially, it was a species of a family that has the genetic diversity of all the animals that we see in the world today that spawned from it. Very simple. So imagine the animals and the diversity that came from before it. Because if that's just a random species within that family, you got to remember that the genetic diversity that is part of that species in particular, it lost all of its brothers and sisters that might have had different genetic variances within it. That's why we don't see a sloth that's 6,000 pounds or 7,000 pounds today, because that species is gone. What was on the ark was a different species of that sloth. So we're left with its leftover. We're left with whatever the genetic variety of the species was that made it onto the ark. That's what we have. That's why we've lost some from the past, because that's all that Noah had. He had one of each of these kinds. So really easy to explain. I mean,
exactly right. Like it's really not that difficult, and yet I still find it hilarious that this is one of the major arguments that the critics are still bringing forth. And here's another thing: is based on the data, based on genetic differences in various animal species, it looks like God created animal kinds with a greater ability to diversify. Okay, because remember, according to Genesis, God created populations of animals. Populations of animals in fully working and functional ecosystems. When it comes to humans, he created two, Adam and Eve. So here's another prediction. We would predict lower genetic diversity in humans. That's exactly what we found, contradictory to the evolutionary model. This is what I pressed on Rob Rowe from Sentinel Apologetics, and he was definitely caught off guard on this one. But it's not his fault, because every evolutionist we've debated has been caught off guard on this line of evidence, because it's precisely why the evolutionary community, I should say, had to resort to the post hoc, ad hoc, out of Africa population bottleneck rescue device, right? Because the evolutionary community is saying, wow, why do humans today have such low genetic diversity? Every single human being on the planet is 99.999% similar. How is this possible? If humans have been evolving for millions of years from Australopithecine-like ancestors to Homo habilis, to Erectus, to eventually Homo sapiens, and mutations every single generation add diversity because mutations are adding something that was not previously there. That would mean humans today should have high levels of genetic diversity, but no, we find that they have low levels of genetic diversity, exactly what would be predicted and expected from the young Earth creation model. Then we find that there's higher levels of genetic diversity in most animal species. There's always an exception to the rule, of course, but the rule is higher levels of diversity in animals, lower in humans, exactly what we would expect. So it's just really bad for the critic, really bad for the evolutionist, and sorry to the old Earth creationists, bad for you too, because you can't say humans are young and animals go back further, because Matt, if you can expand on this, what do we know from the CO1 gene about diversity in animals?
Everything went through a bottleneck all at the same time. There's no doubt about it anymore. It was completely reset from aquatic life to birds to humans. All of them came out of the same exact bottleneck. So,
well, but why does that study, Matt? Why does it say 90% and not 100%? I mean, what's the deal?
Well, what would we expect if our model was true? What did Noah do? Did he bring 100% of the animals, or did he bring about what, like 10% of all existing life? Oh, he did. Shocker.
Yeah. Like, for example, what did Dodgeball Dan say? He made an argument implying that we're saying this data, this DNA diversity data, suggests the special creation event. No, Danny boy, the flood event.
Yes.
Go back to the drawing board and try again, because Matt, we did a 3-hour video a couple months ago, maybe 3 months ago. Who knows? Time flies by when you're having fun. Refuting his there's no nice way to put it. I mean, it was sad. His sad video trying to refute the mitochondrial DNA CO1 gene barcoding study. Yeah. So we put out a really thorough refutation, and essentially it's been ignored. But that's all you can do is ignore it when you have no response or rebuttal. So no, you have the barcoding data in animals, and then the low genetic diversity in general data plus Y chromosome mitochondrial DNA for humans that shows what? All life originated not that long ago within young Earth creation timeframes. The old Earther wants to try and have their cake and eat it too. They want to say, oh, young Earth, young creation, but, animals go back further. Nope, that doesn't work based on barcoding. Oh, well, the Earth goes back further. Well, that doesn't go well for you either for another bunch of reasons that we'll get into now. So Jamie Russell, I appreciate the super chat, brother. And great to see 41 people in the chat, even at 2 a.m. So he says, standing for truth creation ministry is bringing the truth for such a time as this. This is my conviction. If you agree, donate what you can. I appreciate that, brother. As I said, we greatly appreciate the support. It's how we can do this full time and defend the truth of biblical creation, as we say. So, Brother Matt, I want to say that the Joel Duff video, which we did for almost 4 hours, touches on about 4 hours of this. So there's no sense in us, anybody wants more details on speciation, go check that out, or even go check my discussion/debate with Vector the other day. I want to ask you a question, Matt, before we get into a couple of these clips. This argument about rapid adaptation after the fall, okay, where a lot of these animals that would have essentially been vegetarian, how could they go from vegetarian to meat eating? How is this possible so quickly in the young Earth creation model? Very common argument. Do we have a response, brother?
Yeah, we have a couple. I don't know why this didn't occur to me earlier. And I started thinking about it, and it makes complete sense. So if you don't want to go with the science, that's fine. We'll get into that, showing that even obligate carnivores today can still choose to eat plants, and they only had to do so for a while before there was sin. And we know that God already knew that the fall was going to take place, so he could have set this genetic diversity within the animal anyway. But that doesn't need to be done, because we have to remember, what did the fall do? The fall cursed the ground, it cursed the plants, and it cursed the animals. Now we know when it cursed the plants, what did it cause them to do? It caused them to grow thorns and thistles. And so what do we know about those? Well, it didn't occur on every plant either, did it? No, of course not. Because there are plants outside that don't have them. So we know it cursed some plants, not all of them. Now, what would the curse of animals do? Well, it could have made them turn in carnivores. So they could have been complete herbivores first, and then the curse caused them to be scavengers and attack man. Because remember, one of the curses was now that man would be fearful of the beast. But why would we be fearful of a vegetarian animal to begin with? Unless God cursed the animal to become a carnivore. So there's that as well. And I do not know why that did not occur to me earlier. It came to me last night. It makes total sense, because we're seeing accursed plants and then a cursed animal, but with no description of what the curse was. But if the curse was to make them violent, like the plant is violent to us now, then it only makes logical sense that this curse would have been carnivory. And we see it. Not all plants have thorns and thistles. Not all animals are carnivores. So it makes total sense. But if we want to get into it, I also made a video, which I will show as well, that shows you that carnivory animals that are complete obligate carnivores will choose plants over meat as well. And if we can see that today at the very end of the potential of animals, that's what we believe, then what makes us think that the great ancestors that had a far superior genetics wouldn't be able to do what animals today can do? So for example, a lot of people have trouble picturing a copperhead venomous snake slithering around the ground and eating seaweed and choosing to. Yet we have an example of that. We also would find it hard to believe that a great white shark would choose kelp over flesh of any kind, especially blood. But yet we have evidence of this as well. We have another shark put into an aquarium and it chose to only eat the turtle food. So we have a lot of examples of obligate carnivores choosing plants. And we're not just talking bears, because you get to a brown bear, they're omnivores, they're going to choose a little bit of everything. But you get to the polar bear, it's going to choose fish because, well, there's nothing else for it to eat. So there's not much option. So I made the video for everybody that we can play real quick, if you would like, anyway, that shows obligate carnivores today doing just that.
Absolutely, brother.
All right,
Absolutely.
everyone.
I like Doki Doki SFT Club. Fan Club says thorn is a modified expression of same gene for leaf. Instead of unfolding, folds into itself to a sharp point and hardens. Very, very interesting. And we've had some good shows on that with John McKay, the creation guy, as well, and Dr. Diane Eager. So yeah, let's definitely play this video, brother.
All right, here we go.
The Bible tells us that all animals were created vegetarian in the beginning. Is there any evidence for this outside of the Bible? Of course there is, and not only everywhere we look currently, but also in the past as well. So what happens when you put a shark or a bear or a lion on a plant diet? They can thrive. That's right, all obligate carnivores can live off of plants, even to this day. Sharks and spiders and snakes and buzzards and piranhas and dolphins and wolves, lions, panthers, house cats, alligators, crocodiles, Komodo dragons have all been witnessed and documented doing just that. During World War II, when meat was rare in Europe, they were feeding the zoo animals in London vegetables because that's all that they had. They all lived on cabbage.
Our crew throws in the bait to begin the test. First tuna, squid, and kelp. Okay, our dinner guest has arrived. A 14-foot female. Whoa! She just took a small bite out of the kelp. She's coming back around for a second pass. Wow, it went for the kelp again. The shark ignored the tuna and the squid and took the kelp.
So as you can see, there's evidence literally in every different obligate carnivore species and family that we have, it's choosing to eat plants, and they don't die from it. So clearly from the beginning, if God commanded these animals to eat plants, and that was just in their genetic makeup to do so, I don't see what the big problem is doing that until there was an actual fall of Adam and Eve. It doesn't seem as though there's a big disconnect of like why this is hard to fathom. I mean, clearly we can see it today. So why in the world is this hard for us to imagine taking place in the past? It shouldn't be. So they're making a really big deal because they're like, I can't look at the teeth. It's obviously designed for carnivory. It's kind of like, well, okay, well, there you go. The curse changed them. We know that epigenetic modification can change teeth today. So, I mean, what's the big deal? We know that when we look at bears, we go over and we see a panda bear and they've been isolated and stuck on the island of Japan. What makes them different than other bears? Well, they got stuck on an island where there's only plants to eat, where they didn't have a source of meat. So they started eating bamboo. And the only genetic difference that they really have would be in their intestinal gut flora, where they have a lot more bacteria for breaking down plants. Normal bears don't have that because they don't need it. So adaptation is very, very predominant and happens really, really quickly inside of these animals. So if there was a change that occurred, rapid change isn't something that would be extremely hard either, because we're going back in time to more genetic superiority for animals. So that if we can see change happening rapidly today, obviously going into the past with a genetically superior animal, rapid change wouldn't be out of the question either. And we make predictions on this ourselves. This is our study. You can find it on Creationist Clothing, creationistclothing.com. And inside of the study, we go to the CO1 gene and we make predictions of what animals were actually on the ark and what the original cat kind was, for example, based on the mutation rate, on genetic diversity. And we destroy the neutral clock theory, which says that everything mutates at exactly the same rate, because that's the evolutionary prediction. And we just destroy that because it's very easy to falsify now based on mutation rates. We can even see there's different mutation rates in human beings. So here's an example of just part of that page. If anybody really likes the science, we're not going to get into that right now because we're going to keep it fun, and numbers aren't fun. So this is a study and showing an example of the cat that we predicted was on the ark and why. So.
Well, here's another thing too, brother, and I want the audience to understand this, okay? Because another thing that your old earth creationists can't deny is, for the most part, is what's called the overturning of junk DNA. Okay. So not only, as you pointed out, brother, not only does the created heterozygosity model predict that in the beginning, Adam and Eve and the original created kinds were front loaded with pre-existing genetic differences, they were also front loaded with variation inducing genetic elements. And we've got a great deal of functional DNA elements in the genomes that were once thought and still thought to be what's called junk, or genomic fossils, or evolutionary leftovers, like pseudogenes, which we now know are necessary to sustain healthy life processes in the cell. We've got paper after paper confirming that. We've also got endogenous retroviruses, ALU sequences. We know that redundancy is key and beneficial. Redundancy, when it comes to human design, is recognized as something beneficial. It requires forward thinking. We see that in our genome. So remember, the evolutionists also assume that the vast majority of our genome and DNA elements are junk. Now we know that's been overturned. We know the trajectory favors genome-wide functionality. This is based on the preliminary data that we have. So what does that mean? That means more potential for genetic change and adaptive episodes. And it's why evolutionists are constantly saying, wow, we are shocked at this rapid adaptation. Epigenetics, for example, got millions of DNA switches just waiting to be turned on via environment. This is all forward thinking, which points us back to the forward thinker. So all of this is exactly why we can also make testable predictions. In the future, we can look ahead and say, listen, once we start doing more extensive genetic sequencing knockout tests, we will predict that this genetic sequence is functional in this way. And if you knock out this DNA sequence, it may result in this disease. I mean, prediction after prediction, which is what? The gold standard of science. So that data as well demonstrates that there is such a great potential in the genetics of living organisms for what, brother? Change, adaptation, and speciation. Now, remember, if anybody's confused in the audience, when we talk about speciation, we're not talking about speciation that's necessary and required by those proponents of large-scale evolution. Remember, proponents of large-scale evolution look back in time to the contraction of genetic information, not the expansion like us. They look back to billions of years ago, a single-celled-like ancestor that evolved from non-living chemicals in a process called abiogenesis, which has been dismantled and overturned, okay? That single-celled-like ancestor would have to evolve into a multi-celled ancestor, which would have to evolve into a fish, into an amphibian, into a reptile, a mammal, a monkey, and human. This requires the expansion of genetic information. And that's also why they predict that the vast majority of the genomes of living organisms are junk. Two opposite predictions, and it's the creationists that are getting the predictions right. So these speciation events that we see are not helpful to large-scale evolution, because what we're seeing, Matt, as we said multiple times, shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity. Okay, we're losing. Species are hitting walls. They're losing the ability to speciate. They're losing the ability to change and adapt because these events are horizontal changes, not vertical changes like large-scale evolution needs. Okay, so I want to make that clear. Although we say speciation, it's not what people like Aaron Ra, who actually refuses to debate, which is why he needed Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal to come on his channel and repeat the same arguments that we've already demolished, because Aaron Ra can't stand up with the big boys. He's not up to date on the data, okay? So this is why someone like Aaron Ra would say, well, macroevolution simply defined is just, change at or above the speciation level. Oh, really? Because what we see when it comes to speciation is a reduction. Reductive evolution is not going to take a fish to fisherman. So I know I was ranting there, brother, but any thoughts there before we go on to the next portion?
No, I mean, Aaron Ra could be refuted really easily with asking him, are lions and tigers a different species? Yes, they are. Can they interbreed? Yes, they can. They can produce a liger. So why are they called a different species? So if they're separated by millions of years of evolutionary time, how can they still breed? If evolution was true, they couldn't. So they're destroyed with basic common sense on genetics as well. But nonetheless, I know we still needed to cover a couple of things. I just thought I would throw that in because he's never thought about it. He's just believed the textbooks, and the more you dig into it and the more you question it, you would have to be an imbecile to believe it after a little while.
And as everybody knows in the chat, we put out a 3.5 hour video debunking Aaron Ra. Everything we're talking about today, we have video upon video, book upon book, article upon article for people to see. And here's the thing, it does not prevent these critics from putting forth the same arguments, which is exactly why we like to do these streams and oftentimes address the same arguments, because we have new subscribers and sometimes it's difficult to navigate through the 1,300 videos. But that's actually why we're getting the professional website as well, to make it easier for people to click articles, click videos. They'll see categories, and it'll be easy to find answers to these talking points that will no doubt still be repeated. But that's fine. That's fine. Ignorance is bliss, but it's not a virtue. So, okay, let's move on now. Matt, I am going to play this clip from a debate between Dr. Kent Hovind and Smokey Sane. Okay. Oops. 44 people at this late. Praise says, yeah, it's awesome. You know, we're going to be doing more of these, but you know, we do so many debates and interviews and discussions that when we do get the opportunity, we want to do these. People probably notice that we just set a show for this Wednesday, Matt Man, Biblical Longevity. So that's going to be a great lecture by Matt Man. So bring your questions. Okay, guys? So I'm going to screen share. This is a section from the debate between Smokey Sane and Kent Hovind. And Matt, we're going to get your thoughts on how Smokey Sane, okay, he pretty well conceded that these certain lines of evidence brought up do limit the age of the earth. But I don't think he quite saw it. I don't think he quite saw that he was actually admitting that his position is not feasible in light of the data. Okay, brother? So we're going to be seeing a brief discussion on the decaying magnetic field, as well as a few other lines of evidence. So here we go, okay? So we're going to start wrapping it up with a few videos here, guys. And then, because we've been going on an hour and a half. So here we go. And then let me know if you can hear it.
Okay. I enjoy science, and I mentioned that time is the pacifier. They have to have billions of years to make their theory. Job, it said in the book of Job, speak to the earth, it shall teach thee. Well, let's see, what is the earth telling us? Does the earth tell us it's billions of years old? The earth certainly has a magnetic field, and the earth's magnetic field, like all magnets, loses its strength gradually. We have lost 10% of our magnetic intensity in the last 150 years. The Earth's magnetic field has declined about 40% in the last 1,000 years. Well, the Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker. It cannot be billions of years old. It gives about a 25,000 year max. That means carbon dating can't work and none of the radiometric dating methods can work because the Earth's magnetic field is changing. That's one thing. National Pornographic even read Geographic. Earth's magnetic field is fading. I agree. Computer models indicate the strength of Earth's magnetic field declined 10% over the past century. Well, interesting. During the next 150,000 years, it rose to a maximum strength and then began to decline. So the Earth's magnetic field is declining. I don't think anybody argues with that. They tried to answer this. Here's NASA had an article about the declining magnetic field. Earth's magnetic field is weakening 10 times faster now. So the way they've tried to come up with a solution for this, they'll say, well, the Earth's magnetic field is reversing. If you have a spinning planet that has a molten core apparently producing a magnetic field, it is absolutely physically impossible to reverse that magnetic field. It can't be done. The whole idea of reversals is baloney. What they've done, they've gone to the bottom of the mid-Atlantic ridge and drilled core samples and noticed there are areas of stronger and weaker magnetism. In some places it's stronger, some places it's weaker. There are no magnetic reversals. The Earth's magnetic field has never reversed. It can't reverse. It can get stronger and weaker. What they were measuring actually was the cracks where the Earth cracked up when the fountains of the deep broke open. The water rushing into the crack would cool it off, locking in a magnetic field. Whereas the hotter rock between these cracks would be losing its strength. So somebody drew a line through the middle of that stronger, weaker, stronger, weaker, stronger, weaker, and called everything below average a reversal. No, it's weaker. If I lined up all the people in the world and found the average height was 5'5", does that mean anybody under that is in the ground, or are they just less than average? So my point would be there are no such things as magnetic reversals. The science tells us the magnetic field's getting weaker. That tells us it can't be more than 25,000 years old. Okay? How do you get billions of years then just with the magnetic field?
Well, you did say,
go ahead, Smokey.
yeah, just a real quick response to that with the magnetic fields, if I could.
No, take your time.
Appreciate it. So the thing, you showed a couple references. You showed one of them that said that it's decreasing like quote unquote 10 times faster now. That almost seems like this is one of those instances where we have evidence that this decrease is not uniform. It's not something we can apply to an absolute uniformity. In fact,
correct. Yeah.
And I also found the idea, I think for the sun, like the idea of the decreasing sun, there was that paper back in the, I don't know, you probably know better than me, Kent, just back in the 50s, where they were measuring where it seemed like the sun was losing like 5 feet a day or something, or an hour or something crazy like that. And then they have had other measurements that they've done since that paper, I guess, supposedly wasn't actually published. But they've done other references too, where they've shown that it's actually fluctuating. Like there's times where it seems like it's decreasing over a period of time, and then it expands and then decreases. And different metrics at different time are giving different results. And I also want to mention this too, for the idea of some of the planets. You had mentioned about this kind of idea of uniformity, losing heat and stuff like that. And I get where you're coming from too, but I also do know that there are mechanisms even inside like Earth, you know, like our plate tectonics, that are a form of replenishing energy, you know, and some of these planets could have the very same thing kind of going on. And there is sometimes this assumption, I guess, maybe in the uniformity of these things, like, you know, throw it away when it doesn't fit and keep it when it does type thing. I said a lot there. I'll yield. Please go ahead.
Well, one at a time. It's true. If the Earth's magnetic field is weakening, which I think everybody would agree it is, all the observed measurements said it's getting weaker. Now, is it a linear? If you go back in time, would it be linear or logarithmic or, you know, geometric? There's probably several different ways the chart could go.
Right.
But either way, it's getting weaker. Whether it's same thing with the sun shrinking. The sun is shrinking. Obviously, it's burning up fuel. Step outside and look at it. Everybody can see the sun is burning. We can feel the heat from here, 93 million miles away. So I think it's been observed that the sun is burning up about 5 million tons of fuel every second. The observations so far have indicated the sun does oscillate, you know, like a burning gas ball. It gets bigger and smaller, bigger, smaller. But the overall trend is toward shrinkage. It has to be. It's losing fuel.
Oh, I agree with that. I would say it's not necessarily this idea of like uniformity that sometimes is presented, like, oh, it's losing, you know, 5 feet, you know, per, you know, hour based on this one thing, when it's really just an oscillation that was being measured. And that's one of the things I was just pointing to that. That's all. And I'm glad we kind of settled that out. I appreciate that.
I agree. It's oscillating, but the trend is still toward shrinkage.
I agree. Yeah, I don't disagree.
Do you agree that would put some kind of time limit on the sun?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I don't. And in fact, I know there's a time clock on the whole universe. The universe has a time clock of heat death. Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the size of the sun is, you know, oscillating, but generally shrinking. But that's less important. The mass of the sun is losing 5 million tons a second. That's how much fuel it burns. Mm-hmm. My van gets about the same gas mileage. Okay. But so the sun is burning. If you go back in time and start adding 5 million tons a second, now again, whether it's linear, geometric, logarithmic, whatever, I understand all that. But the sun would be heavier. I mean, an hour ago, the sun was heavier, which makes gravity stronger. Now we're talking, you know, minuscule amounts compared to the size of the sun. But if you want to go back billions of years, you got a problem. Because now I got all that stuff in my slide presentation here somewhere. But if you want to go back billions of years, the sun would be so massive, the gravity would be changing, and it would suck all the planets in. You cannot say the Earth has been going around the sun for billions of years while the sun is losing mass. Not geometric, not geophysically possible. That's why I say
I think if I do know, and again, I would have to go look this up. I wouldn't say anyone to quote me on this, but I do remember in vague reference that our particular sun has had different stages of its cosmology. In fact, there's a stage of our sun where, you know, habitable life certainly wouldn't be possible on Earth. We live on a middle-aged planet in a middle-aged solar system, in a middle-aged galaxy, in a middle-aged universe. And like everything seems to just rest in this neat little niche, you know, of like perfection, where based upon where we are in our universe at our specific time, this is the reason we can see the heavens. This is I mean, if we were at a different place in the universe, or, you know, in a different galaxy or something, or at a different location, we wouldn't have the same frame of reference we do. We wouldn't see the heavens the way we see it. You know, I mean, there's something to be said seemingly, and I agree with this.
Can you hear me, brother?
Yes.
Okay. So he goes on about the fine tuning, not giving an actual rebuttal, which nobody disagrees with. That obviously there are many thousands of fine tuning parameters. Okay, so I actually made some notes listening to this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too, because I don't think that he even noticed that agreeing with that was detrimental to his position. Okay, so Kent pointed out that the Earth's magnetic field, the trend is decay. Reversals don't happen. Reversals don't work. Okay. Decay means, what does it mean? It means there's no counterbalance. If the magnetic field is getting weaker, now whether it's linear or whatever you're calculating it by, is it exponential? Looks like it's exponential. Okay. It doesn't matter, because kind of like with the sun. Okay, these fluctuations or these oscillations as they were discussing and both agreeing with, they don't matter because the overall trend is still shrinkage. There's still a time limit and a huge time limit. It's like this, okay? It's like genetic entropy. We have low impact deleterious mutations accumulating from generation to generation, far too many for selection to remove, okay? We know beneficial mutations are far too rare, about 1 in a million. So you can have 20, you can have 30, 50 beneficial mutations, but guess what? It's not going to counterbalance the damage. The overall trend in genetics is what? Degeneration, extinction. Okay? That's the trend. Just like the trend with the decaying magnetic field is decay. The magnetic field is getting weaker. Okay? Just like with the sun, the fact that the sun is losing fuel, it's burning up fuel. Okay? Whether you got fluctuations or oscillations, nobody disagrees with that. But just like your rare beneficial mutation, it doesn't matter because the overall trend is still shrinkage. That's not an answer. So when Smokey actually agreed, and I think you noticed it right away as you were moderating, right? We got to stay neutral. He conceded the debate. He lost the debate. He didn't even try, like, he didn't rebut Hovind's magnetic field. How Hovind went right for the jugular, because he demolished this whole argument and rescue device from reversals. And Smokey just agreed, sure, the overall trend is decay. That limits the age of the earth to 20, 25,000 years. So do you think he noticed that, what he had conceded to, Matt? And what are your thoughts? Those are the notes I got, brother. So yeah, what are your thoughts? Go ahead.
I think that he almost noticed, because Ken said, by the way, if that decay is off, if that ratio is off and this decay is off, that means that carbon dating is off, radiometric dating is off, and he agreed. So I don't know why he would want to continue to hold to old Earth, which basically really only comes down to radiometric dating and distant starlight. You take away those two things, deep time is just gone, you know. So I don't know why he admitted that those two things are falsified, when those are the only two things he wants and needs to determine that the Earth is old. So what he should have used as an argument would have been the sun's oscillating assumption, basically that the gravitational pull and the fusion created, expanding it, and then there's some type of energy that moves around the sun, allowing it to disproportionately take energy and move it around so that the sun shrinks and then it grows again. This would be an example that I pulled up right here. Can the sun shrink? They go, well, yeah, but every 11 years, the sun's radius oscillates up to 2 kilometers, shrinking it. And then the magnetic activity is high, expanding it again. So this is one of their concepts on how they try to save it. Now, what I mean by saving it is they need some kind of rescue device, because otherwise their theory is just dead in the water. So how are they going to save that? Well, is the sun shrinking? You're looking at an image right now that shows that there's a trend where the outer perimeter is going in. But like they said, every 11 years it must be going out again. So this is what it comes down to. When the gravitational forces cause the shrinking on the surface to go in, they say that, well, there's pressure that builds up in the middle, and that pressure causes nuclear fission, which pushes the sun back out again and to expand. So that makes sense, but is it really what we see? And it's not, because the calculations now have actually been done. And this is what I'm going to show you right here. Is the sun's magnetic field actually weakening? We go back to the studies more recently. 2020 shows that there are solar magnetic fields that have been steadily declining in strength over the past 2 decades. Oh, isn't that odd? The last one just said, well, yeah, it's still declining, but in 11 years, it'll expand again, because the pressure allows it to build up, and then boom, the fusion as allowing it to expand. So yes, it's declining, but that principle of it being sucked in still causing it to expand. But here's the thing. We see the trend is not just weakening magnetism. By the way, here's I'm going to show you the actual math as well, so you guys can see that it's not just one assumption. These are the actual mathematic calculations that have been done recently in the 2020. This is what they've studied, and this is the math. And they've been doing these cycles, which last 20 years. So the cycles go back farther than the 11 years, much farther. So if we're seeing a reduction in gravity and a shrinking of the sun, what does that tell us? Well, it tells us two things. Remember, you can't have fusion happening and occurring and pushing the sun out, because that's causing it to grow again, and then less gravity. So both have to be occurring at the exact same time. So we're actually seeing both. That's why the sun is shrinking in size and why gravity is getting weaker. So you're seeing a loss of magnetism, and yet the sun is still shrinking because the magnetism's stronger, a stronger force than nuclear fission. And then as it's shrinking and it's time for it to expand, let's say that it's trying to, well, guess what? Even with the pressure causing nuclear fission, it's still not enough to make the sun actually grow. It's still shrinking. So you have both effects occurring at the same time. So you have gravity weakening, you have nuclear fission weakening, and you have the sun shrinking. And that's why it's shrinking. Because if there was stronger nuclear fission, then it would overpower the weakening gravity and magnetism, and it would be the sun would be expanding. But since we only see a contraction, and a weakening of the gravitational pull, then we know that there also has to be a weakening of nuclear fission. So those three factors would have been my answer to refute literally their only rescuing device. That's what I have to say.
Epic.
Did the second law begin at the fall?
No, definitely not. And the reason I say that, because people seem to misunderstand that the arguments in thermodynamics, it talks about entropy. Now, entropy is loosely related to disorder, but it's not really quite like that. It's a bit more subtle than that. You see, so there's some things that we regard as good that are still uphill in entropy, like when you eat food and digest it, you see, you're breaking down the molecules of the food, and your body's going to build it up again. So digestion is definitely increasing disorder, but we don't seem to mind that too much. Now, the sun shining light and heat onto the earth, that's a classical example of entropy going up. But we know the sun lit and heated the earth before the fall. So entropy was definitely operating there. You can bake a cake. How do you bake a cake? You break the egg and you mix the flour, you mix the salt, the sugar, whatever you have there, the yeast, okay? And so what do you do there? You mix it up. Now try and get the eggs, flour, sugar, and salt back again. You can't do it, right? And you bake a cake. What do you do when you bake it? You're actually disordering the protein molecule, denaturing proteins. So the egg protein denatures, binds the whole thing. And the yeast or the baking powder decomposes, releases gas into the cake and makes it all fluffy. You see, these are all entropy increasing processes that we regard as good. Yet we know
believe it or not, we still get people who mechanical engineers and claim to know the second law use the example of snowflakes and ice and salt crystals as some argument against entropy.
Okay, that's a different topic. So I addressed that in my book By Design. It's actually coming out in a new edition soon. Okay, but my book, The By Design, I talk about crystals and how they are irrelevant to the argument from design, because, see, a crystal is actually a low energy structure. It's a very ordered structure. There's not much information in crystal. It's a repetitive structure. You see, you got a unit cell, you repeat it, you see, and the six-fold structure is you got randomness, but you're repeating it six-fold because of the way the water molecules bond and go to their lowest energy state. There's not much information in a crystal or a salt crystal. In fact, if you break up a salt crystal, you just get more tinier salt crystals. You don't change anything really. You're just getting smaller versions of the same thing. But if you break up a protein or DNA, you're destroying the whole thing. Okay, so it doesn't work. It's a case that, like in my first book, Refuting Evolution, that's about 20-something years old now. I talk about the difference between the order of a crystal is more like saying A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, repeating the same thing. But the order of a protein is more like the works of Shakespeare. It's not repetitive, but it's also not random. So what life has to have, it can't be ordered and low information like a crystal, but it also can't be random. It must be specified, but not a regular pattern, though. That's the thing about living things. That's Refuting Evolution, Chapter 9. I talk about that.
Yeah, I find it surprising that they use the ice example, because clearly in the formation of ice, you have the removal of heat, which is an entropy, which is an increase in entropy.
But you see, what happens, the ice crystallizes and releases heat into the surrounding. So it means the overall entropy of the universe is going up in that process, because the increase of entropy in the surroundings balances the loss of entropy in the ice crystal. Okay, so the idea is that the overall entropy is going to increase no matter what you do. If the body growing, we're going to increase entropy in the process. I mean, everything we do increases entropy. But I'll post a link of an old article of mine where I talk about both the crystals and also the view of entropy of the second law and the fourth. So I talk about both of those in this ancient article that I've pasted below there.
Well, those are some great. Go ahead, Jordan. I was going to have a question.
I was just going to finish off in our engineering course, and I'm going back quite a few years now, probably over 40 years or so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we were introduced to thermodynamics, and one of the things they taught us, and it stuck into my head, the total entropy is always increasing. It's the total entropy. And you look at from a universe point of view, the total entropy is always increasing. So
exactly.
Epic. More irrefutable points. Yeah, it's awesome. We got 50 to 52 people still in the chat, even at 2:30 in the morning. I was saying, Matt and I will do more of these late night streams. We'll look for some of these talking points and spend some time debunking them and laughing at them. This has been a lot of fun. Antonio says, well, it's morning over here, so maybe there are more people from Europe watching. Yeah, anybody who's in the chat now that kind of just tuned in, we've been doing this for over an hour and a half. Definitely go back. We spent about the first hour just demolishing this argument from speciation when it comes to the theistic evolutionists, really the old earth creationists too, and naturalistic evolutionists. We got into rapid adaptation post-fall when it comes to your vegetarian animals to meat-eating animals. We've touched on a number of things. So overall, what we see, so in other words, Matt, he didn't see that he pretty much just admitted there, which I think a lot of people could see in the audience too, that here's another thing that I've noticed, okay? We've had, we've hosted 120 debates or so, some really big debates. We've hosted Kent Hovind for like almost 30 debates. And I've noticed a trend. And tell me if you've noticed this too, Matt, okay? So these old earthers or atheists, they'll debate Kant, and they'll get into the, the overall shrinkage that we see in terms of the sun, which limits the sun, or even the magnetic field. They won't actually challenge him during the debate, or they won't actually refute him during the debate, but afterwards they'll go around saying things like, oh, Kant's lying about this argument or that argument. But why didn't you refute it in the debate?
Yep,
why didn't you bring up your argument to Kant in the debate? Because they knew that it would get demolished. They just want to go talk tough in the comment section of their own stream. Yeah, have you noticed that, brother?
Well, they come and they tell you that, I've been prepping for this debate for 6 months. Yeah, and you can't take a note. You can't write down that he's been lying and how to refute it. I mean, why not? Like, did you change your mind in the middle of the debate and go, well, it makes more sense when I'm talking to him? Like, I don't understand. Just use it. Like, here's the thing, okay? We understand that there's a nuclear source in the sun and that it can date old, but what do you expect the sun to not be created with nuclear fission? Of course, the nuclear energy source just means that the sun could last for billions of years. It doesn't mean that it is billions of years. It's kind of like creating humans and animals without any genetic diversity built in. What does that even mean? Are we Legos? We have to have genetics. We just like the sun has to have nuclear fission to work. So of course it has to have something. It's kind of like where are these arguments coming from? You have to think of it. Our starting point is Genesis, which says God created. Therefore, it's a creation hypothesis. You can't just have something created and be empty and be void. Right. You know, the atheists are always going, "Oh, cars don't reproduce."
Well, I'll just say this one thing. Great points. It would be like what we always point out: if God created Adam and Eve with no pre-existing DNA differences, He just created them completely homozygous. That wouldn't make any sense. Now His command to be fruitful and multiply would be to what? Be fruitful and clone yourselves? Obviously, that pre-existing material would have to be there. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, just like the sun. The sun would have to have nuclear fission occurring. It has to have gravity. If it doesn't have both of those occurring at the same time, we're doomed. We wouldn't be in a Goldilocks zone because guess what? The sun would grow and consume us. The magnetism would pull the sun's heat in, and we'd freeze to death. So which one is it? Seems like everything seems to be created pretty perfectly. So yeah, just because the sun can last billions of years, that's exactly how it was created. Sounds perfect.
Exactly right. So what we see then is, and maybe I have a feeling Smokey noticed it afterwards. Maybe even right after he said it. I don't know. But, okay, this is why a lot of people rightfully pointed out, I mean, he lost the debate. By debate standards, age of the earth, old or young. And you pretty well admit that, yeah, what we see is overall decay when it comes to the magnetic field, overall shrinkage when it comes to the sun. It's the same thing. The rescue devices are the same rescue devices that the evolutionists employ for genetic degeneration. No, when it comes to the genetics of living organisms, the overall trend is what, Matt? Down. Degeneration. What about a couple beneficial mutations there, Matt? Won't that counterbalance the damage?
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. Having lactose tolerance going to turn me into a dinosaur one day. Sure it will. Stupid.
Well, I mean, what if the decay of the magnetic field is not linear? I mean, is that going to save the day? Or the sun oscillates? Is that going to save the day? No, the overall trend is decay. The overall trend is shrinkage, and the overall trend is degeneration. Okay, there's no way around it, and that's why these scientific based arguments they really do struggle with. Brother, I'm going to share screen right here. So we've had plenty of interviews, but we've actually addressed this magnetic field argument in great detail. And both Dr. Sarfati and your points were actually phenomenal. I mean, it's so bad for the critics, but Dr. Jonathan Sarfati and also Dr. Lyell addressed this too. So I just want to go to their points. It just goes to show that these rescue devices have all been dealt with by PhD scientists, but the critics are not up to date with the literature. It's why they come in unprepared, and it's why you can jump into a stream where somebody like Rob Rowe is saying that there's no young earth creationist PhD that's actually using their PhD for anything good, and then you point out another number of scientists, including Dr. John Sanford, inventor of the gene gun, who actually converted to young earth creation because of the genetic data that puts shelf lives on genomes. And he even spoke at the National Institute for Health about human genetic degeneration. And he knows it's a problem because he has the young earth creation starting point that tells us man was created perfect, free from mutations. And over the last 6,000 years, we've accumulated mutations. Therefore, we've accumulated disease. We've accumulated problem after problem. I mean, there's just one. And then they're caught off guard. They have no answer other than, oh, you're being mean. So anyways, let me know if you can hear this, brother. Question before we shut it down here. Yep. You also mentioned Earth's magnetic field and how it's decaying and it limits the age of the Earth and the universe overall. Have you been convinced at all then with any counters to that one? Have you seen any? Is this more so just a rescue device as well now that they're employing?
Yeah, the rescue device there is that the Earth's magnetic field recharges itself in a magnetic dynamo. And the There's problems with that. We know, for example, that the sun flips its magnetic field every 11 years. And that's well documented. And it does that because it's rotating differentially. It's gas. It can twist itself up, and it's constantly doing that because it's a ball of gas. Earth, not a ball of gas. And so it doesn't rotate differentially. And so we would not expect Earth's magnetic field to be flipping today. Now, during the flood year, all bets are off. Plates are moving at rapid speeds. And so that we do think the Earth's magnetic field flip rapidly during the flood year and perhaps subsequent to that. I've done some of my own research on how that would affect the production of C14 in the atmosphere due to the fact that the Earth's magnetic field blocks cosmic rays, which produce C14. I haven't published this yet. It's just kind of, I'm still sitting on it, but seeing kind of what it means. But yes, the Earth's magnetic field is complicated. It probably did flip multiple times during the flood year, but there's no evidence that would recharge the magnetic field. No, none whatsoever. As far as we can tell, that would have just caused it to decay even faster. In terms of losing energy, as far as we can tell, the Earth's just been losing magnetic energy since its creation about 6,000 years ago. I haven't seen any compelling evidence to the contrary. And these dynamo models, they're full of holes. And they require that the magnetic axis be aligned with the rotation axis, which for the sun it is. Earth is close. Uranus and Neptune way off. And yet they have magnetic fields that should have decayed if they were really billions of years old. And so I'm not remotely convinced by these dynamo models. But if you've heard of a dynamo model, that's what it is. It's an attempt to try and get the magnetic field of Earth to recharge itself. And they think that continues to happen, that it'll continue to flip. We think it's probably done flipping. That was something that happened during the flood year. There's no mechanism to do it today.
Yeah, it makes.
Can you hear me, brother?
Yeah.
So isn't it funny that we did this interview November 25th, 2020. We've also had other shows on this. We've talked about it with Professor David McQueen, Jonathan Sarfati. You know, we've dealt with all these arguments in rescue devices, and it's like, will it stop them from bringing them up? No, especially people that, you know, like somebody like Smokey saying, where he's like, you know what, I'm going to focus my attention on young Earth creation now. So what he's going to do is go to anti-YEC websites, right?
Yeah.
And he's going to recycle all the talking points that have already been demolished. And he's just going to make himself look worse than he already looks. But he seems to really pride himself on that anyways. But yeah, you know what I mean? So these new critics are just going to recycle all the already debunked talking points. Am I right, brother?
Yeah, that's why we have to remind them. It's like, we've made videos on this to help the people so that they can get their criticisms answered. It's kind of like we spend a lot of time writing, but people don't like to read. So we make it even easier by making videos, and not just me and you sitting here like this. We literally go and make pictures and edited videos. We go out of our way to make it more understandable as well. So there's not even a reason why they can't even grasp what we're saying as far as a rebuttal goes. So I'm still confused at why in the world they don't know them yet. It's like, I still get comments about like, I can't believe you think this. I'm like, did you finish watching the video? Because it's literally in there. And they're like, well, I didn't watch it. I only watched 5 minutes. It's like, oh, well, why are you talking to me then? Just watch the video. Crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty bad for the critics right now. As we always say, it's a great time to be a biblical creationist in 2021. And what we'll do now is I'm going to play this clip from Dr. Sarfati because we're going on 2 hours, and I know we're both kind of tired. I was out in the sun all day at my parents' house with the kids, and I'm kind of starting to feel it too. So what we're going to do is we're going to play this clip. Then since you and I are, we love to leave no stone unturned, even if we may be losing our voice. I've been throwing so much data out there. We do want to deal with the last argument we heard about plants. Okay. So for the audience sake, let me know the audio is good. I'm going to play this clip now from Dr. Sarfati. Anybody who has not seen these interviews, guys, the playlist got to be close to 70 to 80 interviews with top creation scientists. Check the playlist. These will be up for the most part on the website. But yeah, go to the YouTube channel, check the playlist. You'll find a couple interviews we did with Dr. Sarfati, Dr. Rob Carter, Dr. Jason Lyell. I mean, we have interviewed essentially the top creation scientists that there are, and many of them on numerous occasions. So we have essentially addressed every argument put forth. So that being said, here we go, and let me know that you can, audio's good. Question for Dr. Sarfati, and I know you talk about this as well. I was just reading it today on the magnetic field in Refuting Compromise.
Yeah.
in one of your last chapters. What are your thoughts on that argument for young Earth creation?
A very sound one, and I've actually Russ Humphreys has I've actually I wrote about that in 1998 and 2014 to try to sort of deal with some of the counter argument to this. I think it's still a very powerful argument. It's measurable. You can measure how the magnetic field is decaying over time, but also that's what we expect from the physics, because when you do something to electric current, the decay is always an exponential curve. That's real physics. You don't find linear decays in nature. It's always an exponential decay curve you find. So when you look at what we measure from the magnetic field and apply to physics, it looks like a decaying, overall decaying field. But during the flood, there were some oscillations in the poles, still losing overall energy. But so the flood seemed to, the poles oscillated quite quickly during the year of the flood. And in fact, it's good evidence that there's rapid oscillation, not oscillation over thousands of years, but a very rapid one, because what they've found is a lava flow. And because the lava flow was thin, they could realize that the solidification rate would have been quite quick. And you see, when the lava becomes solid, it preserves the magnetic field as at that time. So they could track the solidification of this lava flow as through the depth, and found the magnetic field changing in that short time that the lava flow cooled down and became a solid. And that's also in that article I just put up above there. So even the rapid reversal of the pole is part of the modern creation arguments about the magnetic field decaying as a young Earth argument.
Since we've digressed a little bit,
and remember what we see in terms of our flood model and these really rapid magnetic reversals, that was actually predicted. And this is another prediction on top of the cold slabs that we've made a lot of videos about. Actually, you can look at one of the debates I had I think 2 years ago, is me and Neff and then Pharaoh Matt on Modern Day Debate. It was me and Neff versus emotionally stunted emoticon, and Snake was right. And I went over in great detail these two predictions: the rapid magnetic reversals during the flood, and then also the cold slabs. So these are predictions that have been known for years and years. These are predictions that we've gone over for years, and yet still no rebuttal, not even a hint that they're even aware of it. So when these critics want war, we just kind of look at ourselves and say, bring the same talking points. And, sometimes we do hope for something new, don't we, Matt? So something new in terms of argumentation, but we rarely get it. But these arguments are still important to address, refute, and demolish. So anyway, go ahead, brother.
I remember how exciting it was when we got that argument about thermal luminescence dating.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It was in your debate. He finally, he thought, he went to the drawing board and was like, oh man, I so got this guy on thermal luminescence. He's never heard of it before. And it's so accurate. It's nearly 100% accurate. And what does it do? It tests the pottery, goes back before your flood. Well, guess what? I was like, really? Let's go check this out real quick. Because remember, forgeries are tested with thermal luminescence dating. And guess what? When we look, it has a 15% accuracy. That's horrible.
Isn't it amazing? Yeah, and that's why I got to give that was my second debate with Conspiracy Cats. That was a long debate. It was like 3 hours because we kind of had a broad topic: speciation, young Earth creation, old Earth creation. And he completely avoided so he really liked the isochron dating. So I came in, demolished the isochron dating, but he came in with thermoluminescence dating. Yeah. And you were watching it, I was debating, and it was kind of like a thought like, oh, wow, a new argument, finally. And then when you look into it, as always, they fail.
You even said during your debate, you said, I bet you when I look into this, it's going to be an assumption-based thing.
Right.
And sure enough, eradicate.
And he said, nope. He said, nope. Your prediction is going to fail, SFT. And these are debates that we've done. I mean, I think it was 2.5 years now where I debated Dr. Stefan Frello on Modern Day Debates. Frello is the only one who has taken up the offer from Dr. Nathaniel Jensen for a written debate, which is published in the AIG journal. I highly recommend you go read it. It's very technical, very good. Dr. Nathaniel Jensen really shows in that written debate just why no one else will take him up on that. So the point that I'm trying to make is we've already kind of debated the best of the best, even just years ago. And what's happening now? Just a lot of the arguments are being recycled, which is why we love doing this too, because it's a lot of fun to debunk these arguments. So anyone who's not seen those debates, definitely check those out. The couple was Conspiracy Cats, Dr. Stefan Frello. Anyways, yeah, so let's get right into the last argument we had, okay, that came to mind was this argument that how could plants grow so quickly after a worldwide flood? You know, the critics will just say this isn't possible. And actually, before I get you to touch on that, I want to let people know that another argument, and we had a presentation with Michael J. Ord a couple weeks ago, but we uploaded a clip titled Answering Challenges to Flood Geology, Scavenge Bone Beds. That was another argument put forth. And we had Mike Ord go over his beds hypothesis. And we just put out a separate clip on that. So definitely check that out. All of these videos and our responses to these challenges, they still go untouched. And I imagine they will. Because what I'm finding is these critics are asking questions, putting forth challenges, but it doesn't really seem like they're interested in having an answer. They're hoping there isn't an answer. But anyways, I wanted to let people know to check that out. So Matt, what are your thoughts? Is the global flood impossible? Is young earth creation impossible because there's no way for the rapid growth of plants after a global flood, brother?
This is going to be answered in multiple different ways. So I'm sorry. This is a test that multiple people have wanted to know. Even Darwin did a test on this, by the way. So there's a couple questions. How could plants themselves survive the flood? Well, first of all, they don't have to. Seeds do. How could seeds survive? So there's a couple ways that seeds can survive. Also, how can they grow? When was it? When did the flood end? Well, the flood ended in spring, right before like the absolute perfect time. Right in the beginning of spring is when the flood actually ended. And we know from the scriptures that the ark actually landed many months after Noah saw mountain tops. So we know that there was ground already viable for plants to start growing. But first, let's go to Darwin. What did they do? Well, I put this together for everybody because this shows a couple different things, a couple different studies for you. Charles Darwin, along with George F. Howell, separately, not together, performed different experiments to determine whether seeds could survive being soaked in salt water and how they could survive being transported over long distances by water. Some of them found that birds would consume nuts and seeds, and then when they died in the flood, their carcasses floated, and then all of a sudden, when the waters receded, their carcasses that have been rotting would have been deposited on the ground, and the seeds would have still sprouted. Matter of fact, in the very bottom part, you can see that it was highlighted that seeds that were completely soaked in salt water all germinated. That's insane. 30 days, exactly what we would expect in our model. But remember, our model also says that the oceans weren't salt water. So these seeds are surviving salt water. So think about that. So we have seeds that are extremely powerful and hardy at survival. They can sprout after they've been eaten. I mean, think about it. We all know that birds eat seeds today, and they go and that's how they diversify and drop seed plantlings everywhere on the earth. That's how a lot of plants diversify. So if we see these in experiments working in horrible conditions, then during the flood, when there was fresh water, of course they would have survived. There's no question. But now the real question would be, how in the world was there enough time for something like an olive tree, for example, to live? Well, we have to remember that the ark grounded on the side of the mountain on the 17th day of the month, on the 7th of the month, and the tops of the mountains were seen on the first day of the 10th month, and then the dove was released on the 4th month, which was the 11th month on the 11th day. That's 4 months. Think about that. 4 months of growing for a seed to germinate to grow an olive tree. Now, if you look up online what an olive tree looks like at 3 months, this is what you get. That's 3 months growth. Are you telling me a bird can't pluck an olive branch off of this and fly it to Noah? Clearly, that's possible. So if we have evidence that seeds can survive a flood, even salt water, and multiple different ways on how. We didn't even cover like the different log mats and different debris that would have been floating other than animal carcasses. But on top of it, we can see that just the seeds alone being in the ground would have germinated after the flood waters receded, because they can tolerate ocean water being high salinization. So meaning lots of salt in the water. But since we know that the ocean salinization is actually increasing today, so therefore in the past it had to be less salty, well, it makes logical sense then that the waters that probably came out and busted out during the fountains of the great deep during Noah's flood would have been fresh water. And we can see a good indication of this when we look at the North and South Pole, that a lot of the ice that's floating in icebergs is all fresh water. That's why it floats. Fresh water floats. Ice, salt water would not. First of all, it probably wouldn't even turn to ice, but it wouldn't float either. So we have evidence that it can grow. So I guess the next one would be, well, how could it grow at such a high elevation? That's also very easily answered when you know that air pressure is based on the ocean sea level. So if sea level goes up, so does everything else. So if the water is very high, and let's say 10,000 feet above where it is right now, that's the new sea level. So of course, seeds can be growing like an olive tree around that area. As it's going down slowly over the next 3 months, it's not very hard to fathom that there would be an olive tree growing now at that region, because it's not 10,000 above sea level like it would be today. It's literally at the new sea level. So that's not a problem either. So literally you're looking at an olive tree after 3 months, and it's not hard to fathom. So we can answer it scientifically, we can answer it biblically, and we can answer it logically, and now we can answer it in this state as well. So when Darwin's proving young Earth creation, that's pretty bad, guys. He literally was trying to prove evolution, and here he proves Noah's flood was completely possible.
And Darwin's finches, it brings us back all the way to the beginning, right?
Yes.
Darwin's finches have really served as a great response to their argument pertaining to speciation. Now, notice how data-filled our responses are. We show the technical papers, we back up the arguments, we show why it's consistent, we make testable predictions. This is not what we find. This is not what we receive from the critics. These arguments will go untouched. If there is an attempt at them, there will not be any better testable predictions presented. There will only be rescue devices, misrepresentations, and straw man arguments. So that was a great response, brother. But I think I have a refutation that you're not going to be able to deal with. It's the refutation of all refutations. Okay, you ready for it?
Okay.
If SFT's formula is right, why aren't there at least thousands of species on the Galapagos?
Oh, come on. Not again. You got me. I thought this was real.
This is what we're dealing with. And this guy, it's so funny, right? Because when we debate, okay, I've had roughly about 100 formal debates, formal/informal. And because we pointed out that any videos that come from a low-hanging fruit, we're pretty well just going to do something like this, right? Take the arguments, point out how silly they are, destroy them. He thinks that's a case of slapping and running, as I point out, right? I think everybody can now see that, you know, when this is the best you got, or as we pointed out in the debate, old Earth creation versus young Earth creation, where he literally conceded the debate. You know, this is really not a case of running away. Okay, it's just a case of you're not. What's the nicest way to put it? We've debated far better. Put it that way. We've taken on far better. Is there any better way to put it than that, brother?
No, I mean, when you're literally debating against a specialist of speciation, and then you debate against a specialist in mutation rates, and then you debate against a specialist in, you know, you name it. We're dealing with the specialist in every field. Right. When you get a critic that comes along and isn't a specialist in anything, and they bring up What chance do they stand? I don't get it.
None.
That's why they make up their arguments. That's why they say things like an olive tree can't grow on the top of Mount Everest. What? I know. When did we ever say it did? That's why they make the arguments up, because otherwise they have nothing to argue against, because if they understood the model, it wouldn't make sense. We're not looking at the Galapagos Island and going, man, I really can't understand why there's not 11,000 species of finches there, because it's obvious that makes no logical sense whatsoever, because we would never expect finches to be every square inch of the island, because they would eat themselves and be cannibals. So it just makes no sense.
And remember, according to our model, after the flood, what happens? We have a lot of environmental niches ready to be what? Filled.
Right.
And what do animals tend to do when we've got environments that need to be filled?
They dive right in. They love it.
Dive right in. They love it. They fill it. What happens when the environment's filled?
Oh man, well, they better start speciating, because then they're going to start having problems with interbreeding. They're going to start problems with diversity. They're going to have, they're going to shift and have other problems. I mean, they're going to go somewhere else. They're going to migrate and cause more diversity. That's why Africa filled up first after the flood. It was a warm region. That's why India and Australia and Africa have the best, because after the flood, everything south was warm. Everything north was cold. It makes total sense in our model. It doesn't make any sense evolutionarily.
No, and it doesn't make any sense in the old Earth creation model. So let me teach the critics a little something again. Okay? Mechanisms. Listen closely, critics. Listen closely, the Smokey Saint comedy show. Okay? Because what we typically find, Matt, like we found in that debate the other day, you have these guys say things like, well, evolution's true. I mean, we know allele frequencies happen.
What's
Allele frequencies in populations over generations. Evolution's true. Oh, what's an allele? What's your definition of an allele?
I'm not a biologist. Leave me alone.
Why'd you bring it up? So it's just funny, right? So this is what you get from these guys. And it's the same thing with this speciation argument, okay? Okay, critic, atheist, Smokey Saint comedy show. What are the mechanisms of speciation? Oh, you're asking the wrong guy, apparently. Well, let me teach you a little something, okay? You can get new species, as we've pointed out. Okay, this isn't complicated. You have a breakaway population that migrates, okay? And then you have what's called isolation. And then you have inbreeding. And then you have, genetically speaking, shifts from heterozygosity to homozygosity. Okay. Now, the evolutionists that reject design diversity, which the old earthers have at least seemed to embrace because the evidence is so strong for it. The evolutionists, the naturalistic evolutionists, they need millions of years to build genomes that have genetic variation, DNA differences, the potential for speciation. Okay. The creationist model has those DNA differences. Okay, you listening? The Smokey Saint comedy show? The DNA differences are front-loaded at creation. Ah, interesting. So now you can have, in just a single generation, okay, you can have breakaway populations. You can have recombination, shuffle up those pre-existing DNA differences. You can have isolation, inbreeding. What's the difference between the evolutionary model and the creationist model? Oh, those DNA differences are already built in. And the speciation events are due to reduction, not an increase in genetic complexity, not an increase in phenotypic complexity, no addition of body plans, no new and meaningful information added to the genome, no, reduction. Based on a genome that was already front-loaded with, for the most part, the genetic variation. Now, we know mutations do add some variation over time, of course, but it's negative variation. It's like the bumps and bruises and scratches on your car. That's negative variation. So that's why when we look to the data and we see rapid adaptive episodes that evolutionists are surprised by, we're not. Because this is what's expected and predicted based on the design diversity hypothesis. And this is why these critics don't stand a chance. So if war is what they want, they better be ready to face off against the data. But the data is contradictory to their positions. Okay? So anyways, I know that was a rant, but go ahead, brother. I think we're going to start winding it down, aren't we?
Yeah, a couple hours. We're already 2 hours in. And,
I'm starting to feel it. It seems these days, after we've done this for 3 years nonstop, 1,400 videos, I am experiencing genetic entropy in the way that I used to be able to talk nonstop for 5 hours. Now it's like after 2 hours, it's like I can't seem to quench the thirst. But it's important that we get this information out there. Leave no stone unturned, guys. A specific critic gave this question that we just debunked, that I also presented just a few weeks ago to John McKay, the creation guy. So we're going to end it with his response, just showing that these have all been dealt with. When you hear an argument against the biblical creation model, just know it's probably been dealt with. And it's actually probably a problem for the evolutionist who's bringing it up. Remember, they'll bring up arguments that turn out to be a problem for their model, like ERVs. And then you turn it around on them and say, ERVs are shown to be functional. Show me some empirical data of co-option. Oh, I don't have that. And then they'll say, oh, there's too many species. And then you'll show them that, no, there's not enough species. Then they're on the defense. You see how their best arguments actually put them on the defense?
they all.
So anyways, yeah, let me, we'll play this one and then we'll call it a night, brother.
John, that I want to get to. It's a question that came in from a skeptic of the younger creation and global flood model. The question is, how could any vegetarian, and in brackets, he put trees, bushes, and grass, survive being submerged or even destroyed by salinated water?
Okay, it is a good question, and it's one that I asked in the middle of the desert of Western Australia. You see, my background is geology. I went and did 3 years of genetics as well. I'd grown up with a dad who loved gardening. My first gardening book, even as a non-Christian, was the old Yates Gardening Guide. Some of you may remember that it started with, man was made to live in a garden. And I thought, that's a wonderful idea. Later on, I discovered it's straight from Genesis, because God made a garden and he put the man in it. So man was made to live in a garden. But that didn't help me figure out, how does a gum tree survive a flood? We're here in Australia, we're noted for gum trees because A, they can actually send their roots down and find the water, but B, if you flood the earth, this dry land plant, how does it cope? So I had an opportunity. I was with the head of the agricultural section in forestry, and I asked him, I said, see that gum tree over there? How does it actually survive? How would it actually survive a flood that went not just 40 days, but over 364 days, plus a few extras, right? And he said, oh, simple, actually. He says, the same way they do now. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, built into the tree, and we don't know why, but every now and then in Australia, we have a year where there's a massive rainfall. Some of you may have read up on Jurassic Ark. Back in 2011, we had 16 inches of rain, 400 millimeters in 4 hours. It overwhelmed everything. And now we've got the opposite. We've got a drought. Now, the gum trees live through both. And I'm out in the desert, and this guy said, well, look, come and have a look at this. He said, this tree grows in this pan. He said, this is a little lake bed in wet seasons. The gum tree stays alive. And he said, sometimes the lake gets so deep, the gum tree should drown. And he said, here's what we've observed. They have a mechanism to turn themselves off. And he says, as soon as the water level gets to the right, humidity, they turn themselves back on again. Now, I had my students, after that conversation, I had my students run Charles Darwin's experiment for 7 years to see if those sort of statements held up. What experiment? Well, Charles Darwin still got bottles in the basement of the university in which he collected seeds, dry land plant seeds, wet land plant seeds, grass seeds, vegetable seeds, etc., and he put them in a bottle, filled it up with water. And then every week they would take one out and they would plant them to see what survived. Here's the general results you got. And by the way, I got exactly the same results in my students for 7 years in a row. So feel free to try and disprove it. You're not going to be successful. Domestic plants, corn, wheat, peas, all the things that Noah would have taken on the ark as feed for himself, they don't survive very well underwater. You put them in water, you end up with pea beer, right? It ferments. They don't do well underwater at all. But all your grass seeds, all of the wild plants, they survive like crazy. I mean, we see it in the real world out here. We have dams. We build massive dams in Australia compared to many countries. And what you find is you flood the dam will be underwater for 25 years, then there'll be a mega drought and it will dry out and instantly the grass comes back up. Now the seed has been there for 10, 20, 30 years. It's not affected by the water at all. So as much as the question seems impossible, when you test this real world, you find that the sort of plants that Noah would have taken on board for food actually need to be on board for food. The sort of plants that are going to be outside the ark anyway, the wild animal food, the vegetarian stuff, no trouble at all. It survives now underwater at all. And by the way, you have an assumption when you say it was flooded with salt water. We do have salt water we dig out of the ground with bores, and we can supply it to most of the plants. They don't seem to struggle too much with it here in Australia. But if you assume all the floodwaters were salt water, you are assuming too much. Here's your assumption. Whatever the sea is like now, it's always been. Charles Lyell's principle of uniformitarianism. Don't assume that the present is the key to the past. When God made the world, it was very good, and there would have been just enough minerals in the water to do the best for all the fishes that they ever could do. That's why many saltwater fishes can move into fresh water and vice versa. And year by year, the amount of salt is actually increasing in the sea. Can you get it? Wink, nudge, nudge. In the last days, a third of the sea will die. That's the inevitable result, which means one thing. When God made the world, he knew how it could end. Interesting thought.
John, again, great answer to a common question, a good question.
All right. Well, there you go. The point is, okay, that was a great extensive answer from Matt Man. Okay. There was a critic that tried to insult or talk down about the experts. Okay. But I think it's clear to everybody that our experts, the experts we frequently have on that are a blessing to so many, okay, they have oftentimes forgotten more than this critic knows. And that being said, Matt, any final words, brother?
No, man, that was good. I just tell IGER, he keeps throwing over comments inside that make me want to reply. So it's coming up. There's a longevity talk coming up.
Yes.
You're mentioning about plants that you want to know what to survive on. Ask me. I got it all.
Yeah, let's see if I can get the advertisement for our big talk next week. Let's see right here. We've got John Mackay, the creation guy, coming on this Tuesday. It's going to be a blast. We're going to debunk the local flood, and boom, biblical longevity with Matt Man, technical presentation. I'll be the host. I'm excited. This brings me back to the old Nick Suter versus Matt Man debate. We guarantee you this presentation will be irrefutable. So bring your questions. The evidence for biblical longevity, did man live to 900, is overwhelming. So guys, make sure you are here this Wednesday and also this Tuesday for John Mackay, the creation guy, Wednesday for Matt Man. So that being said, I think we're going to shut it down. We got through everything, another 2 hours and 10 minutes. If anyone has any questions or anything, always let us know. And that being said, God bless, standing for truth, and Matt Man are out.